So restaurants are opening back up, and at the same time we have this amazing Black Lives Matter movement going on, and one of the biggest goals of the Black Lives Matter movement is to end systemic racism, something that I fully support. So I just want to take this time to remind everyone that tipping in the restaurant industry is actually a product of slavery. Let that sink in. Tipping in the US is literally a result of slavery. And I think that if we truly want to get rid of the relics of slavery in this country, it's time to have an honest conversation about tipping in the restaurant industry. So a brief history on tipping in the US, it started at about the same time slaves were freed in the 1800s. Basically, the newly freed slaves needed jobs. And restaurant owners said, well, you can work here, but we aren't actually going to pay you. Instead, anything you make as a tip, you can keep. The newly free slaves didn't have much of a choice. They needed the money and they needed a job. So they accepted this terrible, terrible offer from the restaurant owners. And thus began the concept of tipping in the United States, as well as the concept of restaurant owners not actually needing to pay their employees a real wage. A tradition literally rooted in slavery, still existing today. And look, I know the concept of tipping waiters isn't anything even close to slavery, and waiting tables can actually be a pretty lucrative job. But think about it. Waiters are literally the only job where your pay isn't dictated by your employer, past experience, or even your job performance. Imagine that. No matter how good of a job you do, no matter how much your boss likes you, your pay is dictated by how much the customer, the person you are literally serving, decides they want to pay you. Good, bad, or indifferent, the customer pays your salary. Thus, tipping promotes a culture in which the waitstaff is actually employed by each individual table rather than the restaurant itself. This leads to all kinds of problems and inconsistencies, like sexual harassment, which runs rampant in the restaurant industry. Because hey, the customer's always right? Wrong. And I just don't understand why restaurants are still allowed to operate this way. Prior to the pandemic, the restaurant industry was booming. And as we think about restructuring our country for the better, I think that maybe it's time for restaurant owners to actually pay their staff and abolish tipping in the restaurant industry, which I'm glad to see some restaurants have actually already started doing. And I know people may respond by saying tipping actually started before the 1800s. And yes, that is true. People were tipping in Europe and other parts of the world long before tipping came to this country. But in the US, tipping did become commonplace after the abolition of slavery. And yet, ironically, we are one of the only countries that still carries on this awful tradition. With that being said, keep tipping your waiters and bartenders, and let me know if you agree or disagree down below.